You did everything right. You studied, you worked, you pushed past every obstacle and built a career that none of the people who raised you could have imagined. You earned more in a month than your parents earned in a year, and you did it. So, why does it feel so heavy? Not just difficult, heavy, like the success itself is a weight you're carrying, like you're constantly looking over your shoulder at who you left behind. Like every financial decision you make has to account for everyone else's situation before it can account for yours. Most people don't understand what I'm about to describe. But if you grew up in a household that was tight financially and you've since built a high income, you will recognize this immediately. It's called financial guilt, and it's one of the most common and most costly forms of financial trauma I encounter in my practice. My name is Jamila McClooney, licensed fiduciary financial advisor, certified in the trauma of money. And today we're going to name this thing clearly because you can't address what you haven't named. Let's work. Where it comes from. Let me explain where financial guilt comes from because it isn't simply about the money. It's about belonging, right? When you grew up in a community where financial struggle is the shared experience, then your identity becomes woven into that shared experience. You belong. You're one of the people who understand what it means to stretch a dollar, to go without, to do without, to figure it out with what you have. And then something shifts. You get the scholarship, you get the job, you get the promotion. And suddenly you're on the other side of a line you didn't know existed until you actually crossed it. You have more. And having more in the environment where your sense of belonging was formed can feel like a betrayal. Not because anyone said it was a betrayal, not because your family told you that you have to feel guilty, but because the distance between where they are and where you've arrived creates a kind of dissonance that the nervous system experiences as disloyalty. So there's also something more specific happening for many first generation high earners that psychologists actually call survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt, in the original context, it describes the guilt felt by those who survive when others don't. And in the financial context, it's the guilt felt by those who thrive when others in their same starting position haven't thrived or don't thrive. You got out, they didn't. And some part of you believes that makes you responsible for the gap. That belief is not logical, but it is extraordinarily powerful. And it shapes financial behavior in ways most people never connect back to its origin. Let's talk about 3 ways it shows up in finances. Now, financial guilt doesn't announce itself as guilt, right? It just shows up as behavior. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll spend years managing the symptoms without ever addressing the source. And here are the 3 most common ways it shows up. The first is compulsive the first compulsive financial generosity. And that's the person who can't say no to family requests, who picks up every tab, who sends money home every month, even when it stretches them, who gives gifts far beyond what the relationship or their current financial situation warrants, who's everyone's financial resource and nobody's financial priority. And when you call this out, they say, I just like taking care of people. And they actually mean it. But here's what I know, and I know because I've suffered from that myself. But real generosity flows from abundance, right? It doesn't create scarcity. When giving consistently puts you and your own financial stability at risk, it's no longer generosity. It's guilt operating as a financial policy. And guilt is an expensive operating system. I know I would always feel, when I went out to eat with my family or when I came around, if something was wrong or they needed help, I knew that they knew that I was in a financial position to help. So it just felt like I had to help. Like, what type of person would I be selfish if I don't help? And I don't have any children, so they have kids, like, and I should help. It just felt like overwhelming and it almost like an uncomfortable situation when the bill came where you're just kind of looking like, I know they're going to give it to me or they're going to expect me to pay it. And then you feel a sense of pride doing it because you feel like, yeah, like I made it and they know where I came from. We struggled and now I'm on the other side of that. And that can really keep you in this cycle of just tying your self worth and self value to what you give and what you can do financially and never really taking any time to really consider yourself and look at what you're actually giving up by being the constant giver. And then that leads me to the second way that financial guilt shows up, and it's in under investing in yourself. So, this is the person who will spend freely on everybody else around them, but they struggle to spend on their own development, right? It may be something that they need to enhance and improve themselves, their health, their own future, something to make them better. They don't do it because they just feel like doing it for others makes them selfless and doing it for themselves feels selfish. So hiring a financial advisor might feel extravagant or taking the vacation feels undeserved. Like you feel like you gotta like work or put in certain like extensions to be worthy of doing something for yourself. Meanwhile, the money flows freely outward, right? To people and causes and requests that feel more legitimate than their own needs. This is guilt deciding who deserves the resources, and it constantly decides that the answer isn't you. I know I also struggled from this in my past. I remember one time I wanted this necklace and bracelet set from Tiffany, and I went and I bought it, and I was so happy. And as I got home, I never took it out of the box. And in a couple of days, I returned it because I didn't feel like I deserved to have it. Like I hadn't done anything in my mind of an accomplishment or something that would make me be worthy enough to treat myself. So I took it back to the store and returned it. And it's kind of crazy now when you think about it because if somebody were to call me and need something, or want something, then I would freely give that. And that was probably way more than what I spent at Tiffany's. So it's really weird how, and I say weird, but I don't mean weird in like a negative way, but it's just interesting how those kind of things and situations paint these stories that you tell yourself about money or you tell yourself about yourself. And then with no real evidence or facts, you just run with it, make up these stories and live your life and make these decisions from that. The third way, that brings me to the third way that financial guilt shows up is it's probably the most insidious way. It's in financial self sabotage. And when it shows up, you might be close to like a real financial milestone, right? I've seen this sometimes with my clients. They might set a savings goal of 10,000 or 25,000, and right before they're getting ready to reach that, they spend it or they blow it. Something comes up. The savings account reaches a meaningful balance, maybe, or the investment portfolio starts to compound. The net worth crosses a threshold that feels significant. And then something happens a family crisis that requires your money, or an impulse that burns through the savings, and you just have to have it and blow everything that you've worked for. And a decision that feels completely justified in that moment, but it leaves you right back where you started. And from the outside, it looks like bad luck or bad decisions. But from the inside, if you're honest, it kind of feels like relief because having that much and that much extra feels dangerous. It feels disloyal. It feels like you've changed or you think you're better than other people. It felt like too much distance from where you came from. And the self sabotage kind of brought you back to the familiar and brought you back to a place of knowing and feeling like you belong. And then what happens? The pattern repeats. Every cycle gets a little more sophisticated. And most people never connect the dots back to the guilt because the guilt was never named in the first place. The guilt is what started all of this. Let me explain why this isn't generosity. And I want to say it clearly because I know this section is going to be uncomfortable for some people. Compulsive generosity driven by guilt is not the same as generosity by itself. The distinction matters, and it's not to make you feel bad, but it's to make you feel free. Genuine generosity is a choice made from a place of real abundance. It feels good. It doesn't deplete you, it doesn't create resentment. You give because giving is aligned with your values and you have enough to give from. On the other hand, guilt driven giving is not a choice in that same way. It's like a compulsion. It happens because saying no activates something that feels unbearable and uncomfortable. The fear of being seen as selfish, or the fear of losing the relationship, the fear of being the person who had it and didn't help. The belief that your financial well being is somehow responsible for everyone else's situation. That's what that guilt driven generosity brings up. And here's the cruelest part of guilt driven generosity: it often doesn't help the people you're trying to help. Chronic giving without accountability, without structure, without the expectation of reciprocal financial responsibility, it creates dependency rather than transformation. So the person you're rescuing never has to develop their own financial resilience because you've made that unnecessary. You're right there and they know you're going to be there. That guilt is costing you, and it may not be serving them either when you really think about it. This doesn't mean stop giving, right? It's about giving from a different place, from intention instead of guilt, from abundance instead of obligation, and from a plan that accounts for your own financial health first so that your giving is sustainable instead of self destructive. You, at the end of the day, are the most valuable to the people you love financially if you're stable than you are if you deplete everything that you have today to try to help them. So now that we've covered that, this is what releasing actually looks like. Releasing financial guilt doesn't mean becoming someone who doesn't care about the people that they came from or the places that you came from. It means becoming someone who can build wealth without using guilt as the permission structure for every financial decision. And here's what that actually looks like: it looks like having a family financial policy that you set intentionally, a specific amount that you give monthly or annually to family that's in your plan, that you've decided on consciously, that comes from abundance and doesn't disrupt your own financial trajectory, right? You're generous, but you're protected. Both things can be true. It looks like being able to invest in yourself without the purchase requiring external justification. The financial advisor, the retreat, the vacation, the course, the thing that will materially improve your life. You buy it because you've decided you're worth investing in, not because someone else told you that it was okay. It looks like building wealth without the subconscious ceiling, getting close to a milestone and actually staying there, letting the account grow, letting the portfolio compound, letting the success accumulate without finding a way to bring it back to familiar. It looks like being able to say no cleanly, but kindly, but no, without a week of guilt consuming you afterward, or feeling bad and avoiding text messages and phone calls because you don't know what they're going to think because you said no. And eventually, it looks like this: being able to talk openly with the people you love about money, not secretly managing guilt, not quietly sending checks, but actually having the conversation about what you're building, what you can sustain, and what you can't. And that conversation might be terrifying. And if you are first generation money or high earners or first gen college grad, then that conversation may be very uncomfortable and difficult for you to have. But it's a conversation that really changes the dynamics and changes it for the good. If you recognize yourself in this video or any of these um, financial guilt scenarios that I explain, I want you to hear something directly. The guilt isn't evidence that you did something wrong. I'm going to say it again. The guilt is not evidence that you did something wrong. It's evidence that you came from somewhere real, that you love people, that you haven't forgotten where you started or where you came from. Those aren't flaws. It's actually really beautiful and good to have to be the beginning of the most powerful financial reframe you can make. Because the moment you stop using guilt as your financial operating system and start using intention instead, everything changes. Not just your balance sheet, but your relationship with what you've built changes. You're allowed to have the change in your relationship, not despite where you came from, but because of it. If you're ready to do this work, I'd love to be in your corner. The link to book a complimentary strategy call is in the description. 45 minutes, no pitch, no pressure, just an honest conversation about where you are and what's possible from here. And if this video landed for someone you know, share it with them. I'll see you in the next one.